A big panel, a big male panel that is going to talk about the focus of the trends and the funding issues of metabolic diseases. We have an excellent moderator with us that is going to take care of leading the conversation here on stage, and that is Kyle Rose. He's the Vice President of the International Diabetes Federation, and he will take the role as moderator. Good luck.
Hello, can everyone hear me all right? Thank you very much to the organizers for having me. Thanks to Marc Julien as well for help put together this panel. And as the kind of adapted title suggests, you may have seen, it will be really focusing on diabetes as an example in the metabolic disease therapeutic area. And my distinguished panelists have done interesting work in this therapeutic area, and we're looking forward to a really good discussion today. I hope it'll be an interactive one. Perhaps to start, I will just ask you each to do a brief introduction of yourself and your organization, if you wouldn't mind.
So thanks. Hi everyone. So Philippe Rocol from Sanofi. Started work in Sanofi about 10 years ago, and on what the value of the data can be for patients, for the healthcare system. And actually I moved on 2 years ago working for the general medicine and focusing on what digital health can bring to the patient, can bring to the healthcare professional, and how we can improve the care pathway using digital technologies. And really happy to be here to discuss about the subject.
Yes. Benjamin Charles. I'm the CEO of Diogenics. We are a regenerative therapy company. We replicate the pancreatic beta cells, which are the only one able to produce insulin. The application of our invention is diabetes, of course, type 1 and type 2. We have recently closed the Series A to achieve first-in-man studies and be the first to demonstrate that C-peptide can go up and diabetes can be reversed.
Thank you. Laurent-Dominique Pifto. I'm CEO of Debiotech. Debiotech is a family-owned company based in Lausanne in Switzerland. We are active now since more than 30 years in research and development of medical devices, and we have two activities, one which is service, research and development as a service, in different areas, and then we have our own projects, and one is in diabetes, in eHealth, a platform of reinforcement learning used to coach diabetic patients. And all these projects are valorized through spin-off companies. So we had already one which has been sold to a pharma company in injection field, another one in dialysis which has been created 3 years ago and which is growing now, and this one in diabetes which is under creation.
Hello everybody, I'm Craig Cooper. I run the healthcare arm of Swiss VC Serpentine Ventures. We take a particularly focused approach to healthcare investing, given the complexity of bringing products to market, meaning that each of our funds is dedicated to a specific therapeutic area, specific verticals within the healthcare space. First fund we launched is indeed focused on diabetes and its complications, including the likes of wound care, chronic kidney disease, cardiovascular disease, and so on. And our role is, and our objective is to be a very active and supportive investor with the companies in our portfolio, and to really make the difference, leveraging our networks, our know-how, and going significantly beyond capital. So that first fund focused on diabetes, we invest worldwide in early stage medical device and digital health companies in the space.
Thank you very much for that. Well, as per my introduction, I've done a number of pieces of work with diabetes patient associations. I live with type 1 diabetes myself, an entrepreneur in the space, including companies like MySugar. And I guess my first question to you, given that, is how are you involving people with lived experience? So let's take people living with diabetes in your projects, in your programs. I know we have both representation from the biologics and the device and digital side, but could you give me an example, perhaps, of how you're including them in your programs?
So I start. So everything we do with digital, we need to do it for the patient. So basically, we put the patient at the center of the reflection, of the strategy, and of the design of any product. So for us, it's really key that everything that we do it for the benefit of the patient, and that the experience that the patient at the end feel is really positive, and that we can measure some type of outcomes using the digital technology. So really wanting to focus on what the patient will feel using digital technology. So just as an example, we actually have a collaboration with a startup that is producing digital twins of diabetic patients, and we are testing actually the solution with actually the help of the patients, how this solution can be tailored, can be adapted to induce behavioral change of the patient in collaboration with the HCP and in collaboration with this personalized digital twin. So for us, it's really, really important to have the patient at the center of any, I would say, project that we do.
Thank you. Any other examples?
Maybe I can give one. As I mentioned, we have this project in e-health that we started a few years ago, and since about 1 year, we are in the clinical validation, and we are finalizing the development of the app. And for that, we have set up in collaboration with the JDRF, so a patient association, patient advisory committee. It's a selection of a few patients that are following the project on a very regular basis. So every month we meet them. They follow the development. They see what we do, and in every direction. They provide feedback, and we then, as a consortium, decide what are the elements we want to introduce, and then we have to give the feedback on why we did that. And probably the most pleasant part has been we had this general meeting of the consortium after 1 year, and all the patients asked to come to the meeting, so they wanted to be present. And so you have these nice discussions where physicians are starting to describe the issue, and then you have a patient saying, no, I don't agree with you, and this is not the reality, this is what we go through. And then you start to have a real discussion about it, and that's where you do progress.
Yeah, well, I applaud you both. I think that, unfortunately, there's a real reluctancy within our space in the industry to include patients from design phase 0. And particularly in the US, a lot of this has to do with legal and liability reasons. I would encourage you to look beyond that. There's a number of either third-party organizations or member associations of IDF, or JDRF's a great example, that are entertaining this in a way that they want to be able to bring you the input from people living with the disease. And I think it can be, as someone who lived and breathed diabetes, both from a patient aspect, but also from an entrepreneur aspect, at My Sugar, you know, when I looked to my left, to my right, there was someone else usually living with diabetes, whether it was a marketeer, a designer, an engineer, and I think that really plays into how a product is developed. Seeing diabetes, in this case, in the wild, really changes your perspective as to the challenges. And on that note, I would like to start the next question by saying the status quo for people living with diabetes is failing. What I mean by that is by every clinical guideline, whether it's coming from the American Diabetes Association, SFD here in France, or otherwise, we're not reaching goals for clinical outcomes, particularly in terms of hemoglobin A1C. And I think the patients would agree that it's failing in terms of their experience, in terms of how their quality of life is with existing tools. I think we've come a long ways, but I don't think we're there yet. And so I think, and just, we were talking about it, just before this panel, my insulin pump that I'm wearing, and I won't mention a brand, had an occlusion. That means that all of a sudden, this device that I'm relying on for my insulin is requiring me to make alternate plans. So interesting timing on that. All to say, fortunately, we have a lot of work being done in R&D on new solutions, and so I would love to hear a little bit about what you're thinking about in terms of the next generation of therapeutics with your company. Benjamin, sorry.
Yeah. So in our mind, which is biased, because we're not from the technology world, we are from the biotechnology world, we want to empower the patient and to let him manage his insulin without even knowing it. So we want to give him back his beta cell mass so that he doesn't have to walk the tightrope between hypo and hyperglycemia, and also he would not suffer from the long-term complications of hyperglycemia. So we want to reduce blindness, amputation, and so on. So we want to have the most patient-centric approach by giving back to patients their own pancreas. So that's the ambition of the company.
Wow, their own pancreas. That sounds good to me. Sign me up. I mean, I think it's exciting to see when we have automated insulin delivery systems, the goals that we can achieve as patients. But there's a lot of hard work that goes into that, whether it's pump occlusions, catheters, CGM devices that may not be adhering all the time. Again, I work in this industry, I have done for 20 years, and I think we've made amazing progress. But I think there's still room for improvement, and boy, does that sound good. So good luck to you and your organization. I'd like to move on to just kind of a broader question for the group. Where do you see the major trends in your respective areas? GLP-1s has certainly been getting a lot of attention. Is this the silver bullet? I don't necessarily think so. Maybe there's some other thoughts on the panel, but in general, do you have any areas you'd like to highlight in terms of trends?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to pick this up to start with. Perfect timing to start with, or that you mentioned GLP-1s. Obviously, they're making the headlines. They're making the headlines in places where medical technology and therapeutics don't always reach because of their impact on weight management and obesity and so on. So really getting into the mainstream. I agree with you. I don't see it as a silver bullet. I'm not sure you put that out there as a position, but that's certainly ours. I don't think there is a single silver bullet in this space. It's the patient population is so large. The numbers are exploding, as we know, particularly in the type 2 diabetes space. So I think there are a whole range of areas in which progress can be made and continues to be made, both on the digital side as well as on the device side. I think one thing I'd highlight on the device side is there is, as you just said, Carl, there's great technology out there. There's been great progress over the last couple of decades in particular. But if you look at it from the biggest picture, it's still a relatively small proportion of that population that's getting access to all of those technologies. So what we're seeing is a lot of interesting work being done by startups in the medtech space to develop more accessible technologies that can have a much wider reach.
Thank you, Craig. Any other thoughts?
Maybe as you introduced the digital side, I want to add on that. I think that the data is also something which is quite critical. I mean, we are collecting a lot of data. Patients will have a lot of data. And it's all the intelligence that you can put around it. So bringing wiser advices, bringing solutions, and not, making the analysis. They will still meet their HCPs maybe twice a year, 3 times a year, and in the meantime, what do they do? I mean, the technology can bring a lot, and this is something that is increasing now.
Yeah, and just maybe to build on that, 2 things. One about the data. So we are adding technology, we are adding, CGMs, pumps, and when you see your doctors, he has to deal with this huge amount of data. So I think, as you said, simplification and being able to provide smart, synthesized data for the doctors will be a huge improvement. Breaking the silos between the data and between the HCP. If you see a cardiologist, a diabetologist, you need to see all the patient data. And I just want to add one thing about artificial intelligence. I think this is going to be really trendy. So we've all seen, the ChatGPT, basically OpenAI. I think we are going to see more specialized artificial intelligence, so artificial intelligence dedicated to healthcare and dedicated to chronic disease emerging in the, I would say, coming years, and it's already starting. And this really leads to what I call hyper-personalization of the treatment. So really having a personalized approach for the patient, for the care pathway, but also being able to provide, I would say, the right treatment at the right time for the patient.
Yeah, and I know that's been discussed on a few of the other panels over the last day and a half in terms of AI. So this one wasn't scripted, guys. I'm going to throw this out there. But any concerns about AI entering the picture in terms of ChatGPT, to name an example, for a clinical organization?
So we I think, all seen the test, ChatGPT trying to be a doctor. Well, it doesn't work. We are still a long way for that. And I think we still have, I would say, a few decades before we see artificial intelligence really replacing the human. But I think it's a huge tool to really being able to help making decision first. So again, having a tool that helps you analyze your data, help you understand actually why the diabetic patient has hypos or hyper, taking into consideration, I would say, other data that the doctor doesn't have. So, for example, maybe what you've eaten, the physical activity that you did. So everything around the patient data. And also, I think, saving time. So we've been discussing recently with nurses in the framework of telemonitoring in France. So they take about half an hour to analyze the different warnings and the data of the patient. And basically using artificial intelligence, they would be able to reduce this time at least by half. So you could increase basically the number of patients that are telemonitor and optimize, I would say, the time of the nurses for taking care of those patients.
I think I'm going to second that point around data and the opportunities for AI. Sure, there may be some threats, some risks, but overall I'd see it as a tremendous opportunity. Amongst other things, we've invested in data analytics platforms that are using machine learning to essentially make sense of what's coming out of so many different data sources, and doing that in order to alleviate capacity constraints in healthcare systems. And our sense is that healthcare professionals are particularly in the diabetes space, are just increasingly overwhelmed by that volume of data. So there's a tremendous opportunity there to really make a difference, both on the healthcare system and then ultimately in terms of impact on patient care.
Building into that, into those two arguments, maybe I'll draw back to the example I just mentioned. So I'm a person living with type 1 diabetes. I'm insulin dependent. For those of you in the room who don't know, that means that I don't produce my own insulin and I need to inject it subcutaneously. So I do that through an infusion pump that I have a catheter for. It's in my left pocket. I have a CGM on my right arm. They're communicating to each other with an automated insulin delivery algorithm. And I have an app on my phone. Wow, that's a lot. That's a lot of burden. I'm probably part of that small population you just talked about, Craig. But is something different about diabetes? We were talking about it in our prep meeting. Is this different from some of the other therapeutic areas in terms of the amount of self-management for patients?
Absolutely. Yes, no question. I think this brings us back to the first question you asked today about how our organizations work with or involve patients. So I've previously been investing in other areas of healthcare, also early stage businesses. I think the diabetes space is really unique because of the self-management, the 24/7 self-management nature of it, and therefore also the engaged nature of the community. So yeah, absolutely, so clear differences between this and other areas.
Thank you. Thank you for entertaining the question. So I guess that begs to ask the question, who pays for all of this? Craig, we've heard from you already a little bit, but just from an investor perspective, you know, how important is it that that a startup that you're potentially investing into presents to you a business model?
Yeah, I think this challenge of business models is one that's very much present. Sustainable business models in particular, and that applies both in the medtech and device space as well as on the digital health side. Perhaps on the medtech side, it's maybe less a question of who pays, but how people pay, so how that model is structured. If payers are acquiring medical technology, if they're leasing technology, the nitty-gritty details of how a company's business model is built. On the digital side, it really comes back to the point you mentioned about who pays. We see a lot happening in the digital space for diabetes, and that's fantastic to see a lot of innovation out there, to see a lot of engaged entrepreneurs. But when we come to that question of business model and who pays, there are certain assumptions in play. Either payment will be out of pocket, so by end users themselves, or there's an assumption that the technology will be approved for reimbursement. So we see in Europe in particular, in Germany, in France, in the Netherlands and other countries following on interesting digital or interesting reimbursement systems being put into place to cover digital tools. But there remains an assumption that if we as a startup achieve reimbursement for our digital platform, that will be a clear pathway to revenue, and that's not necessarily the case. So, I mean, certainly in many cases we'll feel more comfortable as an investor when we see that there is a clear pathway to, for example, healthcare providers, medical institutions, clinical networks paying for technology. If we're looking towards the end user, I think it's certainly a bigger challenge.
I'm not sure that anyone has the answer to your questions. I would love, I mean, if someone has it, please give it to me. Because we are investing quite a lot of time trying, as a company, developing an e-health solutions, but trying to understand where are the burdens, who is paying for what, and trying to fit within this environment. And this will vary from one country to another. And if you go to Switzerland, this will vary from one canton to another. So you have 26 states, 26 different systems. So it's just a huge amount of work. And by the way, this is pushing us to go first to the US because it's a simple market. This is a side remark. But it's a huge problem because you add that to the development of the technology, and then you have to think about reimbursement and how you can make money out of it. It's not easy.
And maybe just to add a few points. I think we looked at several countries, what would be business model for this kind of digital solution. I will just basically repeat what you say, but rephrase what you say, guys. Patient willingness to pay is really low. We've looked in the US, we've looked in Europe, Australia, and also emerging markets. We don't see actually the patient paying for any digital solution, just on the simple reason that the benefit that they see is really limited. Okay. And this might be also a point about regulation that we can talk about later. The payers. Well, in France, we have a great healthcare system, but we have always challenge of having this solution reimbursed because they don't see the impact on the patient. So in diabetes, HbA1c is, I would say, the gold standard. And how can you measure an impact of a digital solution on the HbA1c? Quite difficult. So I think one of the trends we see is that if we are able to save time or optimize the care pathway, there might be a way for having healthcare professional, healthcare institution, or basically hospitals pay for this kind of solution, providing that this we have a clear benefit in terms of time saving.
So you touched upon regulatory briefly, and I was worried about just merely bringing up this topic, it would dominate our panel. But since you mentioned it, does the regulatory landscape drive what is a successful product, or should we be pushing regulatory authorities to adapt. And I know there was a comment about HbA1c. It's a good example. In diabetes, we're seeing a lot more attention on time in range, potentially as a secondary endpoint. So clinical trials are really expensive. And that's a huge venture for a startup-sized company. In the case of digital health products, should randomized clinical trials really be necessary? Are we beginning to see requirements shift? A lot of questions there, food for thought.
So maybe I did that on purpose, just to have this regulatory topic talked about, and we don't need to spend the whole time about it. But I think there are change in the way the regulators are seeing actually the clinical trials. Real-world evidence is something that is really, really emerging and actually being accepted by the regulators. I think the point I wanted to make is really more about the complexity of having your medical device onto the market. We discussed that in the prep meetings. Well, from the moment you change a data point and you convert that or you multiply it, you become a medical device class 2A, at least. 1 year more to go onto the market, just by a simple multiplication of a constant, almost. So you see what are the challenges the startups are facing. 1 year more to the market for a simple multiplication. So for me, it's a huge barrier to entry. And we discussed when we were prepping the meeting is that basically now digital health solutions, they are more about wellness and simple observational of the patient and not into real solution because of those challenges and those regulatory challenges.
Yeah, thank you for introducing our schizophrenia. But clearly, we have to go on one side on the wellness because it's a customer relationship we have to build. I mean, we have patients, but we also have customers, and we need to understand and to be quick, to be rapid. So we have the wellness part. And then we have the medical side, which is going much slower. And as an entrepreneurial entity, we have to play on these two sides at the same time.
So is there a path for small companies and startups, to operate successfully in this space solo? Or is it only after having gained access via acquisition or licensing agreement or otherwise to a major pharma med device partner? Or does it even matter? I'd be interested in the entrepreneur versus investor perspective on this one.
No, you start. Fine. Does it matter? Great question. I think as an investor, we're going to be looking most closely at the fundamentals of the business, let's say. And the fundamentals include not obviously only, of course, that there's a great product that meets a clear unmet need, there's a significant market opportunity, but that there's a team behind that company, that technology, that understands how partnerships as well as pathways towards exit might look. But to your question, is it possible for small startups, for young companies to fly solo, so to say? Yes, I think it is possible. It clearly requires significant capital, especially on the device side. But from an investor perspective, I don't think that per se is what we're going to be looking at least not solely. We are going to want to understand how that pathway plays out and where the value inflection points are. So what are the key milestones that a company needs to hit in order to go to the next level? But I'm quite comfortable with the fact that partnership or exit could or indeed might have to come earlier.
Well, thank you very much for an interesting discussion to the whole panel. And I think we've managed to reserve time probably for 1 or 2 questions if there's any burning questions in the audience. Yes, I see one hand up over here. Please.
Thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be here and hear you two all. Let me introduce myself. I'm Elisabeth de Bayer, CEO and founder of Ona Labs. We are a little startup that is working precisely in diabetic sector. We have developed a technology that allows to measure glucose using sweat. And we have all the problems you are mentioned that because we are a very, very little company. We have tried to fundraise with private investors. We have some of them. We have tried to the ESM instrument. We have the seal of excellence, no? But sometimes it's quite difficult for us, no, to get involved in all these things, the clinical trials, to convert a startup as a medical company, as you have said, is very, very difficult. You need a lot of money, but not only that, you need partnership, and I think we need to increase the partnership as soon as possible, in the earliest possible, because we have validated the technology, we have entered before in the sport market because it's more easy to enter in this, to validate the sweat measurement in that, because you know that it is not a requirement in that way. But I think we need to be more flexible, maybe, and I don't know if you can be more creative, how we, all the stakeholders, investors, big companies, little startups like us, that we have technology and we can and we want to empower the patients, at the end, we could be faster and not to lose opportunities. So thanks for much. It's just an appointment. Thanks.
Thank you. Any additional comments?
No, I think it's a great point. It's very well made. It's just a very concrete reminder of how challenging it is, and particularly with limited resources, small teams, and the complexity of the market and bringing products to market. So, I mean, I think what's the opportunity that is presented, particularly within the diabetes space, is that thirst from the big companies, from the strategics for external innovation. And that's where, obviously, depending on the nature of a partnership, it can, of course, present opportunities to companies such as yours that can really help you on that journey, because they're really actively seeking the next technology that's going to take them through this decade into the next.
Thank you. Yes, another question over here.
Hey, good afternoon. My name is Gindin Igor. I'm Calitech CEO. It's a young startup. We are developing a solution for obesity and diabetes. And I would like to ask you, discuss it briefly, but maybe better understand your perspective about the shift that the market made after the GLP-1 and GIP inhibitors, and how do you think it will affect the market and the VCs?
Yeah, I mean, point taken. So the question's about the shift from this emergence, or not necessarily emergence because they've been around a while, but it seems to be recognition in this recent year of the GLP-1 factor. We've seen that certainly with CGM companies and their stock prices. Any comments from the panel on the impact of GLP and the shifting marketplace? If not, I have my own comment. Go ahead, Philippe, please.
So maybe just a quick point from really marketing and business perspective. There is a huge impact of GLP-1 to put a patient on the insulin. To be honest, now there is a take on that. Is that what we see is patients that are coming too late onto the insulin treatment, and there is a huge delay, especially for type 2 patients, to be put on the right treatment. So this is why I think technology, artificial intelligence, and the smart use of data can help this patient journey to be smoother and to have, again, the right treatment at the right time, and it could be used to put the patient under, I would say, better control. But indeed, there is a huge impact on how endocrinologists in the hospitals and GPs really treat their patients, and this has an impact on the treatment of the patient at the right time.
Yeah, thanks for that point, Philippe. I mean, I think it's important to also state how hugely effective this category has been. I mean, from a cardioprotection standpoint and glycemia, I mean, it's really impressive. So I don't want that not to be mentioned. But for me, technology enthusiast, if anything, it proves the need why we need technology perhaps to help us titrate some of these new molecules coming. I'm quite bullish on the technology side, so that's my view. I'm sure there's other views out there, but I think we've run out of time, so I want to thank you for your attention, and a big round of applause to all our panelists. Thank you.